My name is Leo Maxwell, and to say that my arrival in the sleepy, unincorporated corner of rural Arkansas was a matter of choice would be a gross overstatement. It was, to be more precise, a retreat born of desperation, a final, sputtering gasp of a life that had unraveled with spectacular speed. Back in the city, a mountain of debt, a recently vacated apartment, and a relationship that had imploded like a dying star had left me with little more than a beat up 2004 sedan and the dregs of my savings account. So I drove. I drove without a destination, propelled by shame and a vague notion of heading south, where the cost of living might be kinder. I ended up in the Ozarks, a place where the forests are thick and the towns are small, separated by long, winding roads that seem to swallow the sunlight. The money was nearly gone when I saw it, tucked off a 2-lane highway, miles from anything that could be generously called a town, was a small standalone diner. It was a relic from another era, with a long, low profile, wide plate, glass windows, and a neon sign that simply read, "Eat," a buzzing electric blue. A smaller, hand-painted sign taped to the front door said, "Help wanted night shift." It felt like a lifeline. The air was thick with the humidity of a southern summer evening, and the chorus of cicadas was a constant, high-pitched thrum in the background. The surrounding woods were a wall of darkness, a mix of towering pines and ancient gnarled oaks that seemed to press in on the small circle of light cast by the diner. I pushed open the glass door, a small bell tinkling merrily above me, a sound completely at odds with the oppressive isolation of the location. The inside was exactly what you'd expect. Red vinyl booths, a long formica countertop with chrome-rimmed stools, and the mingled smells of stale coffee, frying bacon, and industrial strength cleaner. An old man with a kind, wrinkled face and a shock of white hair was wiping down the counter. He wore a faded flannel shirt, and he looked up at me with pale, watery blue eyes. "Can I help you, son?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I saw the sign," I said, gesturing back toward the door. "For the night shift." He stopped wiping and gave me a long, appraising look. It wasn't unfriendly, but it was thorough, as if he were measuring my worth in some way I couldn't understand. "You got any experience?" "I've waited tables. Worked in a kitchen back in college." It was true, even if it was a decade ago. "Night shift's quiet," he said, folding his rag and placing it under the counter. "Real quiet. Just me and you mostly. I'm Silas. I own the place." He extended a calloused hand, and I shook it. His grip was surprisingly firm. "You need the work." "Yes, sir. Badly. That's the best qualification there is," he said with a slight smile. "Job's simple. Keep the coffee fresh, serve anyone who comes in, and clean up for the morning crew. Pay's not great, but it's steady. You'll get your meals free, too." The last fella he had to leave. "Family emergency." He said it quickly, his eyes flicking away for just a second before returning to mine. A flicker of something, unease, maybe, passed over his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I can start tonight, if you need," I said, eager to lock it down. Silas nodded slowly. All right, son. The job's yours. He came around the counter and led me back toward the kitchen. There's just one thing. This old place, it's got its quirks. Been here a long time. Things get a little strange out here in the middle of nowhere. Especially at night. He stopped by the kitchen swinging door and pointed to a small, laminated card hanging from a nail. It was yellowed with age, the typewritten text faded but still legible. These are the rules, he said, his voice dropping a little. The old-timers who built this place, they had their superstitions. The folks who worked here after them, they added their own. I find it's best to just follow the list. Keeps things running smooth. I leaned in to read it, a smile tugging at my lips. I figured it was some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy, a local tradition, to see if the city kid was gullible. The list read, I work the night shift at a diner in rural Arkansas. We have rules. 1 T10 at the stroke of midnight. You must brew a fresh pot of coffee. Pour 1 cup into a black mug and leave it on the far end of the counter. You will not serve this cup to anyone. The morning shift will dispose of it. 2. The radio in the kitchen must always be playing. It doesn't matter what station, but it can never be silent. If the music stops for any reason, turn it back on immediately. 3. If a man in an old-fashioned, dark suit comes in and orders a slice of apple pie, you must serve it to him with a glass of water, not coffee. He will pay with a silver dollar. Do not put the coin in the register. Place it in the small wooden box under the counter. 4. The walk-in freezer door must be locked between 3:00 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. Do not open it for any reason during this time, no matter what you hear. 5. If the lights flicker once, it's just the old wiring. If they flicker twice in a row, lock the front door immediately and do not open it for anyone until sunrise. Even if they look like a customer in distress. 6. If you hear 3 slow knocks on the back delivery door, ignore them. Do not look. Do not answer. Do not even acknowledge the sound. They will go away. 7. Never take salt out of the diner. You can use as much as you need here, but none of it leaves the building. 8. There is a horseshoe nailed above the main entrance. If it is ever hanging upside down, leave immediately. Do not finish your shift. Just go. I finished reading and turned to Silas, chuckling. All right, you got me. Is this for real? His kind expression had vanished. His face was grim, his eyes serious. A's real as a heart attack, son, he said quietly. I don't know the why of all of them. I just know this diner's been here for 70 years. And it'll be here for 70 more if the rules are followed. Don't be a hero. Don't be a skeptic. Just do your job and follow the list. He clapped me on the shoulder, the friendly gesture feeling more like a warning. Your shift starts now. I'll be in the back doing inventory if you need anything. For a little while, anyway. The first few hours were mind-numbingly dull. The highway outside was a ribbon of black, with only the occasional pair of headlights slicing through the darkness before disappearing again. I cleaned the coffee machine, restocked the napkin dispensers, and wiped down tables that were already clean. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the tinny sound of a country music station playing from the small radio in the kitchen, as per Rule Fate 2. At midnight, feeling foolish, I'd brewed a fresh pot of coffee. I poured a cup into the one solid, black mug I found on the shelf and placed it at the far end of the counter, just as Rule 51 instructed. It sat there steaming, a silent, absurd offering to an empty room. The hours crawled by. 200 a.m. came and went. I read an old newspaper I found under the counter. Every article about local politics and high school football feeling like a dispatch from another world. The silence of the place began to work on me. It wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, expectant. The darkness outside the windows wasn't just an absence of light. It felt like a presence. A living thing watching the brightly lit diner, this lonely island of warmth and life. At 3:05, I remembered Rule 84. I walked over to the heavy, stainless steel door of the walk-in freezer and slid the thick bolt lock into place. It felt ridiculous. I was a grown man, locking a freezer because a piece of paper told me to. Still, Silas's grim expression stuck with me. I was in the kitchen, washing a few dishes when I heard it. It was faint at first, coming from the back of the diner. Knock. I froze, the soapy plate slipping in my hand. Knock. It was slower this time, more deliberate. It was coming from the rear delivery door. Knock. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird beating against the cage of my bones. It's a raccoon, I told myself, my mind scrambling for purchase on the slippery cliff of reason. It's a prank by some local kids. It's Silas checking up on me. But the sound had a quality of intention that defied any rational explanation. It was patient, methodical. I stood there in the sterile, fluorescent light of the kitchen, every muscle tensed, listening. The tinny country music from the radio suddenly felt thin and useless, a flimsy shield against the profound silence that had fallen outside. I waited for a voice, for the sound of footsteps walking away, for anything. But there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thumping in my own chest. The knocks did not come again. Slowly, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I finished washing the plate, my hands trembling slightly. I walked out of the kitchen and back into the main dining area. The diner was empty, a brightly lit sanctuary against a sea of absolute blackness. I looked again at the laminated card, its edges curled with age. The typewritten letters seemed to stare back at me, no longer a joke, but a set of instructions for survival. I was no longer sure the list was a prank. And as I stood there, alone in the heart of the Ozarks, a chilling certainty began to dawn. I was not the only one working the night shift. My eyes drifted to the front door, and above it, the horseshoe. Rule Fate 8. I squinted, confirming its U-shape was still pointed upwards. A rusty smile meant to catch luck and ward off evil. In folklore, iron was a barrier against the things that lurked in the dark, a symbol of man's world pushing back against the supernatural. Seeing it in place offered a sliver of comfort, however irrational. I felt a sudden, strange kinship with the long-dead person who had hammered it there. They must have heard the knocks too. The next hour was a new kind of torment. The previous boredom was gone, replaced by a vigilant anxiety. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of leaves in the wind outside, sent a jolt through my system. I busied myself with meaningless tasks, wiping down an already spotless counter, rearranging the salt and pepper shakers. Anything to keep my hands moving and my mind from spiraling. I noticed how full the salt shakers were, and for a moment, I thought of Rule 57A, never take salt out of the diner. Salt, another ancient ward against evil, a symbol of purity. This place wasn't just a diner. It was a fortress, armed with the superstitions of generations. It was just after 4 a.m. when the headlights appeared. Two perfect circles of white emerging from the oppressive darkness of the highway. They slowed, turning into the parking lot. My relief at the prospect of a human customer was immediately crushed by a wave of dread. I watched as a car, a long, black sedan that looked decades old, it was immaculately preserved, rolled to a silent stop. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit that seemed to absorb the already faint light. He moved with a stiff, deliberate grace, his feet making no sound on the gravel as he approached the diner. The bell above the door tinkled, a cheerful, incongruous sound in the tense silence. He slid onto a stool at the counter, not in one of the more comfortable booths. He placed his hands, pale and slender, on the formica. He didn't look at the menu hanging on the wall. His eyes, dark and empty, found mine. "Good morning," I managed, my voice sounding strained. "Coffee?" "No," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any accent or emotion. "I will have a slice of the apple pie." The words hit me like a physical blow. Rule 3. If a man in an old-fashioned, dark suit comes in orders a slice of apple pie, you must serve it to him with a glass of water, not coffee. My mind raced. This was it. This was a test. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And to drink?" I had to be sure. "Water?" he confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "No ice." I turned away, my back to him. And the feeling of his eyes on me was like a physical weight. I took a deep breath. My hands shook as I cut a slice of pie from the dish under the glass dome. It looked so normal, so mundane. I placed it on a plate and filled a glass with water from the tap. When I turned back, he hadn't moved a muscle. He was like a photograph. I set the plate and glass down in front of him. "Here you go." He didn't reply. He simply picked up his fork and began to eat. He ate with a strange, precise economy of motion, never taking his eyes off his plate. The diner was silent save for the soft, wet sound of him eating and the faint crackle of the radio from the kitchen. I stood behind the counter, pretending to wipe down the espresso machine, my entire being focused on the man. The air was thick with a tension that felt ancient and unknowable. When he was finished, he set the fork down neatly on the empty plate. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a single coin, placing it on the counter. It was a silver dollar, large and heavy, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't a modern presidential dollar. It looked like an old Morgan or piece dollar. Something minted a century ago. "That should cover it," he said, his voice as empty as before. He stood, turned, and walked out. The bell tinkled his departure. I watched as his vintage car started without a sound and pulled back onto the highway, its red taillights shrinking into the darkness until they were gone. I was alone again, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stared at the silver dollar. It was real. I picked it up. It was colder than it should have been. A deep, unnatural cold that seemed to leach the warmth from my fingertips. I remembered the rest of the rule. Do not put the coin in the register. Place it in the small wooden box under the counter. My hands trembling, I knelt and found the box. It was simple, unadorned, made of dark wood. The lid wasn't locked. I slid it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn red velvet, were dozens of other silver dollars. Some were tarnished to a near black. Others still held a faint luster, but they were all the same type of old, heavy coin. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't a new rule. This transaction had been happening for years. Decades, maybe. How many night shift workers had stood where I stood, serving pie to that thing? I dropped the new coin in with the others and slid the box shut. I needed to get a grip. The sun would be up soon. I just had to make it to sunrise. That's when the lights flickered. They went out for a split second, plunging the diner into absolute blackness before humming back to life. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Rule 5. If the lights flicker once, it's just the old wiring. My breath hitched in my throat. I waited, praying it was just that. The old wiring. Please, just be the wiring. A beat of silence. Then another. I started to breathe again. Then they flickered again. Off. A quick, sharp pulse of darkness. Twice if they flicker twice in a row. Lock the front door immediately. And do not open it for anyone until sunrise, even if they look like a customer in distress. Panic, pure and primal, shot through me. I didn't hesitate. I lunged from behind the counter, my feet nearly slipping on the checkered linoleum. I reached the front door and slammed the heavy deadbolt home. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent diner. My back pressed against the door, I stared wildly around the empty room, my chest heaving. What now? I crept to the wide plate, glass window next to the door, my heart in my throat. I peered out into the cone of light cast by the big E8 sign. The parking lot was empty. The highway was a desolate ribbon of black. The woods across the road were an impenetrable wall. There was nothing. I felt a surge of relief, thinking maybe I had overreacted. Maybe the rule was just a precaution. And then I saw her. At the very edge of the light, where the gravel shoulder of the road met the encroaching darkness, a figure stood. It was a woman, I thought. She was hunched over, holding her arm as if it were broken. She took a stumbling step forward, her movements jerky and unnatural. Her face was pale, a white smear in the gloom, her expression a mask of what looked like agony. She lifted her head, and her eyes seemed to find mine through the glass. She raised her free hand, not in a wave, but in a desperate, beckoning gesture. A customer in distress. The words of the rule screamed in my mind, a frantic, silent alarm. But my every instinct, every shred of humanity I had left, screamed back. She was hurt. She needed help. I stood there, frozen, my hand on the cold brass of the locked door, caught between the terrifying, inexplicable rules of the diner and the sight of a person who might be dying just a few feet away. My hand was on the deadbolt, the cold metal a stark contrast to my sweat-slicked palm. Outside, framed in the lonely pool of light cast by the neon sign, the woman crumpled on the gravel looked up at me. Her face was a mask of agony, her body twisted as if in unimaginable pain. Every decent instinct I possessed screamed at me to throw the bolt, to rush outside and help her. This was a human being in distress. The rules, the strange events of the night, they were just stories, superstitions. This was real. But Silas's face, grim and serious, swam in my memory. As real as a heart attack. Son. The cold weight of the silver dollar in the box under the counter. The patient, deliberate knocks on the back door. The flickering lights. The rules hadn't been wrong yet. And Rule 25 was chillingly specific. Oh, do not open it for anyone until sunrise, even if they look like a customer in distress. I was paralyzed, caught in a tug of war between my conscience and a primal fear. I was only just beginning to understand. The woman took another stumbling step toward the diner, her good hand outstretched in a desperate plea. Please. Her voice was a thin, reedy whisper that barely carried through the thick plate glass. Help me. He's still out there. Her words sent a fresh spike of ice through my veins. He. I scanned the darkness behind her, the impenetrable wall of pine and oak trees that lined the highway. The woods were silent still. There was nothing there. My eyes snapped back to her, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't her arm she was holding. It was her wrist, and her hand was dangling at an impossible angle, her fingers brushing against her own elbow. A grotesque, broken marionette posture that no human anatomy could permit. My breath caught in my throat. It was a trick. It had to be a trick of the light, a distortion caused by the glass. But as she shuffled closer, her movements became less like an injured person and more like something poorly imitating one. Her gait was jerky, her feet dragging through the gravel with a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. She reached the window, pressing her face against the glass. Now only inches away, I could see her clearly. Her skin was waxy and pale, stretched tight over her skull. Her eyes, which had seemed wide with pain from a distance, were black, bottomless pits, devoid of any light or emotion. The expression of agony was a painted-on mask, and the paint was cracking. Let me in, she rasped, the sound no longer a whisper, but a dry, guttural command. Her free hand came up and flattened against the glass. It wasn't a plea anymore. It was a demand. I stumbled back from the door, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. My decision was made. The rules were not superstitions. They were armor. This diner, with its salt shakers and its horseshoe, was a fortress, and I had just been ordered to man the walls. I shook my head, my whole body trembling, and mouthed the word, "No." For a moment, she just stared, her black eyes fixed on mine. Then, the mask of pain on her face didn't just crack. It melted. Her features seemed to slide, to lose their cohesion. The corners of her mouth stretched impossibly wide, pulling back from gums that were black and rotten. Her jaw unhinged with a series of wet, popping sounds, opening far wider than any humans could. A shriek tore from her throat, a sound of grinding metal and tearing flesh that vibrated through the soles of my feet. It was a sound of pure, undiluted hatred. She slammed her misshapen hand against the glass, not with a fleshy thud, but with a sharp crack like stone hitting stone. For a split second, I saw her fingers elongate, the nails darkening into jagged black talons that scraped against the window. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. She didn't run. She was simply consumed by the darkness, vanishing from the edge of the light, as if she had been an illusion all along. I was left alone in the ringing silence, my back pressed hard against the cool vinyl of a booth, my lungs burning. The only sounds were the frantic thumping of my own heart and the low hum of the coolers. I stared at the window, half expecting to see a crack in the glass, but it was pristine. There was no evidence she had ever been there. My legs felt like water, but I forced myself to move. I did a slow, terrified circuit of the dining room, peering out each window into the oppressive, watchful night. Nothing. The parking lot was empty. The highway was a desolate ribbon of asphalt. The only movement was the gentle sway of the pine trees in the slight breeze. I felt a strange, hollow victory. I had followed the rule. I had survived. But the sun was still hours away, and the certainty that I was being hunted had now settled deep into my bones. The diner no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage, and the predators were circling. It was then that I noticed the silence, the real silence, the country music, the constant, tinny companion that had been playing from the kitchen radio all night was gone. Rule Fight 2A. The radio in the kitchen must always be playing. It doesn't matter what station, but it can never be silent. If the music stops for any reason, turn it back on immediately. A new, cold dread washed over me, eclipsing the terror of the woman at the window. The kitchen. I had to go back into the kitchen. The short walk from the dining area, past the counter, and through the swinging door, suddenly felt like a journey across a vast, dangerous plain. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe in my peripheral vision. The mundane shapes of the coffee makers and milkshake machines took on monstrous silhouettes. I pushed through the door into the kitchen's sterile, fluorescent glare. The little silver radio on the steel prep table was dead. I reached for it, my hand shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to grab the dial. I twisted it frantically. Nothing but static. A harsh, whispering sound that seemed to mock the silence. I kept turning, past dead air, past more static, until finally, I found a voice. It was a late night preacher, his voice a low, passionate rumble, talking about fire and damnation. It wasn't music, but it wasn't silence. It would have to do. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. I leaned against the counter, taking a deep, shuddering breath. I had done it. I had followed the rules. That's when I heard it. It was a soft sound coming from behind me, a faint wet scraping noise. Scrape, pause. Scrape. My blood ran cold. I turned. Slowly, my eyes locking onto the heavy, stainless steel door of the walk-in freezer. The door I had bolted shut nearly 2 hours ago, as per Rule 24. The sound was coming from inside. I stood frozen. Every muscle locked. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and full of anticipation. I strained my ears, listening for anything. A voice, a footstep, the sound of the thing at the window returning. Then, from the other side of that thick, bolted steel door, a new sound drifted into the kitchen. It was soft, clear, and utterly out of place. It was the sound of a child, giggling. The sound was so utterly alien to the horrors of the night that it reset my terror completely. It wasn't a shriek, a growl, or a scrape. It was a child's giggle, soft and clear, drifting from the other side of the thick, bolted steel door of the walk-in freezer. My mind refused to process it. A child. Here, locked in a freezer. It was impossible. It was a violation of every kind of logic. I stood frozen, my hand still on the dial of the now preaching radio. The scraping had been a prelude, a crude attempt at fear. This was something else entirely. This was sophisticated. It was a sound engineered to bypass every rational defense and strike directly at the heart of human instinct. The woman at the window had been a test of my resolve. This was a test of my soul. Let me out. A small voice whispered from behind the door, the words muffled but clear. It's so cold in here. I felt a visceral, wrenching pull in my gut. My mind screamed trap, but my body wanted to move. To unbolt the door, to save the child. This was the most insidious attack yet. It wasn't a monster showing its fangs. It was a monster hiding behind the most innocent face imaginable. The previous entities had been overt threats, but this one was trying to make me the instrument of my own damnation. By following the rules, I had so far been a passive observer to the horror. This thing was trying to make me an active participant. I took a shaky step back, my eyes wide, fixed on the heavy steel door. The giggling started again, a little louder this time, a little more insistent. I thought of the rules, my mind frantically flipping through the laminated card in my memory. Rule 24 had been specific: lock the door between 300 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. It said nothing about what to do if something was already inside. It said nothing about what to do after 3:15 a.m. Was the danger over? Or was the rule simply to ensure the thing was trapped inside with me for the rest of the night? The silence from the dining room felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was watchful. I was caught between 2 points of a closing vise. The thing in the freezer behind me, and the memory of the thing at the window in front of me. The diner, this brightly lit island, had become a cage. A sudden, loud clatter from the main dining room made me jump so violently I nearly screamed. It was the sound of metal hitting the floor. My head whipped around, and I peered through the small, circular window of the swinging kitchen door. One of the chrome, rimmed stools at the far end of the counter, the one nearest the black mug of coffee I'd left for no one, had toppled over. It lay on its side on the checkered floor, rocking slightly. No one had touched it. That was it. The final straw. Something had changed. The passive observation was over. The barrier, whatever it was, felt thinner. I had a sudden, desperate urge to check the final rule, the one that felt like the ultimate failsafe. Rule Fate 8. There is a horseshoe nailed above the main entrance. If it is ever hanging upside down, leave immediately. Do not finish your shift. Just go. I had to see it. I had to know. Leaving the giggling child locked in the freezer felt like a sin, but opening it felt like suicide. I chose the third option. I fled the kitchen. I moved through the swinging door and into the dining room, my steps feeling loud and clumsy in the heavy silence. The fallen stool lay like a casualty of some unseen struggle. The black mug of coffee was still there, untouched. Its contents now cold. My eyes were locked on the front door at the far end of the room. The walk towards it was the longest of my life. Every shadow seemed to writhe. The red vinyl of the booths looked like drying blood in the humming fluorescent light. The air was thick, electric, buzzing with a malevolent energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I could feel unseen eyes following my every step. I reached the door, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I didn't look out the window. I didn't want to know what might be waiting in the darkness. My gaze traveled upwards, to the space above the doorframe, where Silas had pointed out the old, rusty horseshoe. It was hanging upside down. The U shape that was meant to catch luck and ward off evil was inverted, spilling its unseen contents onto the floor. The ward was broken. The fortress had fallen. The final rule was now active. Leave immediately. There was no room for doubt. No time for skepticism. The command was absolute. For a moment I was paralyzed by a fear, so profound it was almost sublime. Then, the survival instinct kicked in, a jolt of pure adrenaline that shattered the paralysis. I didn't think. I acted. My hands, clumsy and shaking, fumbled for the deadbolt I had thrown hours before. The sound of the bolt sliding back was like a thunderclap, a declaration of my retreat. I twisted the knob, yanked the door open, and plunged into the humid night air. The world outside was no longer a sea of darkness. It was a path to escape. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the gravel parking lot, the stones crunching loudly under my feet. I half expected a clawed hand to grab my shoulder, to hear that metallic shriek from the woman at the window, or the innocent giggle of the child from the freezer, now right behind me. I reached my beat-up sedan, my fingers fumbling with the keys. The lock clicked open. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands shook so violently it took 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. The engine turned over with a reassuring roar. I slammed the car into reverse, spun the wheel, and stomped on the accelerator. The tires squealed on the asphalt as I peeled out of the parking lot and onto the empty 2-lane highway. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I fixed my eyes on the road ahead, a black ribbon disappearing into the endless forest. I drove. I drove with a frantic, desperate energy, pushing the old car faster than it was ever meant to go. The towering pines and ancient oaks that lined the road were no longer just trees. They were silent, looming witnesses that seemed to lean in, their branches like grasping arms. Every shadow on the road was a lurking figure. Every rustle of leaves was the sound of pursuit. I don't know how long I drove. An hour, maybe two. I just drove south, away from that place, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Then I saw it. A faint, pale line of gray on the eastern horizon. As the sky slowly brightened from black to charcoal to a soft, bruised purple, the terror began to recede, replaced by a hollow, trembling exhaustion. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the road and painting the Arkansas landscape in the gentle colors of a new day. It was over. I had survived the night. I am writing this from a motel room 2 states away. I never went back. I didn't call Silas. I left everything I owned in that small apartment I had rented. It doesn't matter. None of it does. I have a little money, enough to keep moving. I know I can never stop. Because I followed the rules, I survived. But I also know what happens when the rules fail. I saw the horseshoe. The protection is gone. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that the things that work the night shift at that lonely diner in rural Arkansas are no longer content to stay there. They are out, and they are looking for the one that got away.